SpectreVision Radio.
Welcome to Caribbean Mystics Podcast,
where we marry mysticism, superstition, and lore. I'm your host, Paulina.
And I'm your host, Gabrielle, and we are your resident Caribbean Mystics.
Join us today as we explore the depths of real supernatural stories
told by real people located right in our very own backyard.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Mystics Podcast. I am your co-hostess, Gabrielle.
And Paulina, co-host S. I like that.
I know, right? I'm just
I don't think I heard that one.
Let's get fancy. So before we actually get into today's episode, we do want to acknowledge that the last time we took a Thanksgiving break, which is why we didn't post last week. But the week before that, we posted an episode and we didn't have a discussion attached.
Dun, dun, dun.
I know. And we've never actually done that before. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. The stars didn't align for a discussion. Like Paulina's kids were sick. And as you can hear in my voice, I'm sick. And I am finding that as we continue to post weekly, it is getting increasingly hard, I think, for us to always be able to line up time for a discussion. Because I'd also like to remind you guys that I live in St. Thomas and Paulina lives in California, and there is now a 4-hour time difference. And so things are a little bit more complicated on our end when it comes to discussions. And so I think you guys may actually see a couple more episodes like that moving forward, where we won't be able to do a discussion, but we will absolutely post an episode for your listening pleasure.
And I'm kind of curious to hear from our listeners, like, what do you think of that? Do you really, really enjoy these discussions afterwards, or are you more leaning towards the stories? I can tell from like the analytics that people tend to drop off during our discussions, which is totally fine. That doesn't bother me, but we do have a percentage that enjoys them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I won't lie to you, there are certain stories where they are really beautiful stories, but we have beaten them to death in terms of the topics that we could cover. And so sometimes it just kind of makes sense to let you guys enjoy the story and not engage in a discussion, because so many of the stories are just, we've talked about those topics before and we don't want to sound redundant either.
True.
Yeah.
Well, on another note, I do want to read a fan mail that we got.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yeah, this is news to me because I didn't know we got fan mail.
Yeah. So sometimes you might notice that we don't reply or get back to you. And that's just because we have a lot of different platforms that we're publishing the show on. So it's hard when we're like, oh, we got a comment on Spotify. Oh, we got one on Apple. Oh, on our Facebook. Oh, on our YouTube, TikTok, Insta. It's so we see them when we get around to them. And we try to read all of them and reply back to you guys. So please don't take it personal if we don't get around to you. But this one was from our YouTube, and it's from Miss Rebecca Smith 3554. And she writes, "Hi, Misties, fellow Virgin Islander here. I have listened to every single release episode, and I love, love, love all of them. Don't ask me to name a favorite. I can't. But some of my faves are The Frenchtown Sukunya, Mermaid in the Water, Little Backwards Feet, Jumbikar, Obea Bloodlines, Peterborough Lights, and this episode, which was The Hanged Man.
Oh.
Yeah, season 4, episode 9, was really a beautiful story. Erskine wanted to rest in peace, and all of the individuals in the story made it happen. While we don't know the relationship between Bish and Jay, I think they were soulmates and the perfect people to give Erskine rest. As children, Bish and Jay were in tune with the spirit world, and Bish's connection to Barbara Chapman was uncanny. It was amazing that Bish and Jay maintained their relationship for decades, and Erskine was a part of their lives, weaving in and out for some time. I could go on. As long as you two keep releasing stories, I will continue to listen to them. Big up, Rebecca.
Rebecca, that's actually so fucking sweet. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much for such a lovely, like, well thought out and intentional message.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we don't always have time to like respond, but when I tell you guys, the messages mean so much to us. And it really does enliven our spirit for why we continue to do what we do. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. On that note, shall
Yeah.
we commence this episode?
Let's get started, guys. Strap in.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are going to take you back into the watery depths, LOL, and we're going to be talking about mermaid lore. And I know that we mentioned a little bit of this in season 1, episode 8 or 7, Mermaid in the Water. If you haven't listened to that episode, I highly suggest it. It is a real life, firsthand account experience of a man named Clyde who stumbled across a mermaid one evening with his friend when they were out fishing by Water Island, which is the fourth Virgin Island. A lot of people don't know I get 4 islands in the Virgin Islands. But his story was really compelling, and Paulina and I were able to get into a really robust discussion after that episode because his girlfriend is a wonderful artist who actually was able to provide a picture that she drew of what he had described seeing. And so we were able to use the picture to support our own um, discussion or debate around the reality of mermaids and how much it lined up with other people's accounts of seeing mermaids. And so we actually wanted to swing the mermaid conversation back around again, because I think they recently came up in another episode we had this season with Rose, um, where she had this really unexplainable occurrence that happened out in the open ocean on a sailboat. And this was during the Luska episode that we had this deep dive with the Luska. So we wanted to talk about the mermaids again because we really actually never got into very deep mermaid lore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course I'm gonna be coming in with some of the, you know,
Mm-hmm.
rebuttal and
Mm-hmm.
scientific perspective on it because not only does it fascinate me, I think I think and what got me started on this was that episode with Clyde. The way that he saw that mermaid really took me down a rabbit hole of like, what would mermaids
Mm-hmm.
really look like if they existed? Which I don't think they
Mm-hmm.
exist, but we'll get to that.
We'll see if we can fix that by the end of the episode and circle back to what Paulina thinks. But before we get started, I just wanted to go into some actual mermaid lore that we have here in the Caribbean region that kind of explains why this conversation is actually so relevant to Caribbean people and Caribbean culture and history, even. Um, the One of the earliest accounts, quote unquote, earliest accounts of mermaid sightings in the Caribbean region that is documented is actually through a European lens. And it was done by Christopher Columbus, who, when he was sailing the ocean blue in 1493, he ended up seeing what he believed to be these mermaid like figures. He saw 3 of them where present day the Dominican Republic is, exactly on January 9th, 1493. He described them as not being beautiful, as they are normally depicted in like European culture. And it is widely believed that Columbus and his sailors actually didn't see mermaids, but they saw manatees instead. And it created this confusion. Except the problem with that is that mermaid lore actually existed in the Caribbean region, and there is evidence to show this far before Columbus came to the region. A really great example of this is that indigenous people in the region, um, like the Taino, they had a really rich spiritual belief system around like water spirits. And one of their water spirits that took on the shape of what we know today as a mermaid is the Akaiya. And it is connected to the goddess Jaguar. And the exact timeline of pre-Columbian beliefs is complex, obviously, because they weren't necessarily writing in the way that we write. But there are different things that have been left behind by the indigenous people that have alluded to these belief systems. And then in more contemporary Caribbean mermaid folklore, we see a lot of influence from African belief systems. So we have the last siren or siren, which is a Haitian voodoo mermaid spirit, and she is the mermaid that she's the mermaid spirit that is encircled around wealth, seduction, and mystical knowledge. You have River Muma or River Maiden in Jamaican folklore, and she's a faired spirit who lives along the rivers. And it is said that she uses her voice to enrapture the men. And then when the men draw near the mermaids, they end up drowning men in the river. And then you have Mama Delu in Trinidad and Tobago, and she's a protective water spirit, and she's often depicted as half woman, half snake. While here in the Virgin Islands, we don't necessarily always acknowledge mermaid lore. I remember when we first were scouring the internets or the interwebs for stories, I had this incredible story come forward. I can't remember who sent it. And the young lady actually never I don't want to say she wasn't interested in sharing her story on the page, but I know she was not super pushed to do it. But I remember she had sent me this incredible story about how she was at Brewers Bay with her family for a family function as a child. And she remembers that she was playing in the water along the rocks, and a mermaid comes up to her, and the mermaid calls her near, and her and this mermaid disappear for what she believes is hours. And they're swimming under the water in the bay, and she could hold her breath, and she lost track of time. And then she ends up coming back to the shoreline. She goes up to her mother and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I've been gone so long and I can't believe this." And her mother is like, "Miguel, you were literally in the water for a couple minutes." And she was so blown away by this experience, by the loss of time, by this mermaid, and the fact that she had this like inner turmoil of like, did I imagine all it is happening, or like, did this actually happen? But what's really interesting about her telling of this story is it's actually very similar to other people's accounts of mermaids. The losing track of time, the ability to be able to breathe underwater. If anybody ever watched that movie, I think it came out in like the late 1980s, early 1990s. It was called Splash. It was a really similar concept. Or even in the 13th Year, the Disney movie
Mhm.
thing, where it's just like the mermaid holds your hand and you have this ability to like breathe underwater just by touching the mermaid. You know, like you see, I always say, you know, like art really does reflect real life. And I just find it to be really captivating that so much of the folklore, not just in the Caribbean, but worldwide, the concept of mermaids is a worldwide phenomena. And cultures that would have never had access to each other literally have such similar iconography of these mythical creatures. You know, like you could look back at history. There's actually this really interesting cave dwelling that was found in 1933, and inside of the cave they have a art like cave drawing that's called the Cave of Swimmers, and it's in a rock shelter with this ancient rock art in the mountains of the Libyan desert. And they have these pictures of like people, but almost like mermaid-like entities, because some of them have 2 legs and 2 arms like people, and then others have these tails like you would imagine a mermaid. And this kind of blew researchers away because the exact timing of when this would have been put is over 8,000 years BC ago. And so I am just someone that's just like art imitates life. And so the fact that they had these art drawings of what they perceived to be these mermaid creatures, and then we've seen this consistent storyline show up in Taino cosmology and show up in Egypt on Egyptian hieroglyphics, is just something that I don't think this naysayers, Paulina and her people them, I just feel like the naysayers can't truly, like, explain things like that away. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's actually crazy. And so one of the people that actually studied that cave drawing believed that it's possibly the tomb of Ramesses. The what is that Roman numeral where it's like a V and then an I?
6.
6. Okay, Ramesses the sixth. And it's believed that the drawing of swimmers represents souls of the dead swimming in the eternal river. And I just find that to be so interesting because when you look back at the Akaiya, right? Or when you look back at La Siren, who is the keeper of mystical knowledge, right? The water is a place that is the womb of the earth, right? It is the keeper of life. And it is believed that that's where souls ferry in between worlds. There's this whole conversation that's been going on TikTok for years about whether the way to get to space is through the ocean, um, believing the concept that water is like a portal. Um, and so, yeah, I just, I've done so much research about this whole mermaid lore, and I do think that there is a lot of fictitious information out there. And I think that there are a lot of people who have made a lot of money creating these really like fake videos about mermaids in
Mm-hmm.
the ocean. And I think that that is unfortunate because I think that it severely undercuts the very real belief systems and lore that is attached to these entities that could not have come out of thin air. And then the last thing I can say before Polly, because I see Paulina gearing up, is that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, estimates that more than 80% of our ocean is unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. We have better maps of the moon than we do of the world that we exist on. And so, with that being said, I think that there is a lot of evidence that points to the fact that we simply don't know. But what I know is that art imitates life. And if it is not a real phenomena, then the art for it could not exist.
Hmm. I mean, it's interesting that you say the evidence because there is just so much lack of evidence of
Here we
any of this
go.
existing.
Brace, are you back?
In 150 plus years of ocean exploration, there's been no fossils, no bones, no carcasses washed up, or any kind of sonar signatures that point to a humanoid fish like creature. So, not only like has there been no evidence unless, you want to go down a conspiracy theory where they're covering it up, that just seems like a lot of work. And as far as exploring the ocean, I guess what I could say is that a lot of the ocean is deep ocean pressure, and which is hard to explore because our tools and instruments and ourselves would crush. Most likely, a mermaid would as well, which tells me like they can't possibly live in those pressures, those unexplored places that we haven't seen yet in those ocean depths, which they don't exist. But if they were to exist, we would have more sightings, right? Especially if they had lungs, they'd have to come up for air. Why don't we see them more often? You know? But that's the other thing. They're always depicted as like half fish, half human, which is really important because biologically that's just impossible. They come from so fish and mammals, they come from totally two different separate evolutionary paths for over 350 million years. Like fish are cold-blooded. They have gills, swim bladders. Their tail fins go up and down, and then warm-blooded creatures like mammals, lungs, complex pelvises, vertical spines, humans. So like to kind of create this like Frankenstein monster chimera of like a half upper torso of a human and a lower fish is just like biologically not possible to sustain life. If I had to go down the route of what a real mermaid would look like, and this might give you a little like leeway towards your argument, it would look kind of like what Clyde described. It would be more mammal-like. It would probably have blubber for to keep itself warm, and it would be smooth. It would probably have lungs, come up for air once in a while. Um, and it wouldn't be fishy like. But again, I just don't see this happening. And some people like to argue that, oh, well, the evolution could have come from the aquatic ape theory. And for those that don't know what that is, it's a
Okay.
hypothesis that suggests that early humans may have gone through a semi-aquatic state, which could explain traits like reduced body hair or ability to hold our breath. And people sometimes use this hypothesis to argue mermaids could have evolved as fully aquatic human mammals adapted to ocean life instead of land. But the aquatic ape theory, again, there's no fossil evidence, no changes in bone density, rib cage shape, limb shortening. There's just no evidence to support it. Whales and seals show extremely clear transitional fossils, but hominins, like human evolution, does not. So that's one big thing. And then just the human traits of being like hairless and the breath control and walking on two legs, like that can support the claim of our traits were just evolved for land. And real aquatic mammals, they start to evolve away from land supporting shape. So like having a human upper torso wouldn't be very streamlined, it wouldn't be really specialized for the ocean. The arms would probably develop into fins, or the body would be smooth and rubbery and thick blubber, and it just doesn't add up.
I will say that I understand, and I think that it's possible that the European depiction of mermaids being like, this beautiful woman, big breast, like attached to like a tail. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think that it is probable that our concept of mermaid has been deeply misogynistically
Hmm.
crafted,
Listen, that's
right?
from horny sailors that have
Yeah,
been
yeah,
on the
yeah.
ocean for way too
Correct,
long.
correct. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that I agree with you in that. I don't know that our European depiction of mermaids is what they actually look like. However, you are talking about how like, wouldn't we have seen them already? People are discovering new creatures in the ocean every day. So, like, for instance, in 2015, scientists were doing a mapping of the ocean floor off the coast of St. Croix to the south, and they found this mysterious blue goo that was all on the ocean floor, just a couple of miles out from the ocean. It wasn't even really that deep. And they were like completely astounded because they had done mapping similarly in other areas in the Caribbean for multiple years, and they had never stumbled across this type of organism. And this happened as recently as 2016 or 2015. And then in 2016, to your point about, sonar and frequency and this, that, and that, there was another um scientific mission that was happening out in the Caribbean Sea, and they discovered that there was a strange whistling sound that was coming from the bottom of the ocean that they had no idea what it could possibly be. And to this day, they haven't been able to zero in on what that whistling sound is coming from the Caribbean Sea. And they have a couple of theories about maybe how, the water and the way that the tide moves through the region, maybe how it hits the bottom of the ocean. The ground is not going to be straight ground. It's like hitting like very high mountainous rock that's just submerged under the ocean. So they've tossed around different theories, but they've never actually landed on what could possibly be causing something like that. Like, and it randomly started too. It wasn't something that continued. Another example of a frequency happening that really can't be explained is even by the Titanic wreck. When boats are traveling through that area and they have this like hypersonic sonar equipment on board, they notice that there are these strange frequencies that come from the area where the Titanic sank, that they also haven't been able to completely like figure out. And so I say that to say that I think you and I are on the same page when it comes to the fact that we don't think that the Europeanized, hyper, sexy mermaid is what mermaids actually look like. But there is just so much in the ocean that we're finding out just in modern times, like within the last 10 years, that makes scientists kind of throw their hands up in this moment. And maybe it's because science hasn't caught up yet, but it could also be that there's shit that we just don't know.
I mean, I can agree, but I just feel like from basic like biology and marine biology, it just can't make sense. It just can't make sense to put those two together. Like the scene of a human torso and a fish body.
Hmm.
And like I said, even thinking like evolutionary, like how that would happen. And I'm trying my best to like say perhaps if it did exist the way that Clyde saw it, it looked like a porpoise or something. But again, there's just like no evidence. There's no fossils. There's no bodies. There's no nothing is washed up. And if these things are coming up for air, because most likely they would be mammals, we would definitely have more sightings. But we don't. And the only thing I could think of is that like people are getting like mistaken identities twisted
Hmm.
with it. And though scientists are finding new things every day, yes, they can also find fossils for really rare sea animals. But again, like there's nothing. There's nothing to support it.
Yeah, but what do you say to all of these civilizations that have these depictions of mermaids? And I'll also, before you answer that, the notion of the Kraken, right, that we saw in Pirates of the Caribbean, it for a long time was based off of a mythological creature until scientists discovered the colossal squid. And then they were able to put a name to what lore had always said had always existed. So how do you, and this is recently, like the giant squid was discovered like in the like 1900s. And so how do you reconcile that you could have storytelling that offers the truth in places that science hasn't caught up, and then when science catches up, they're able to actually acquiesce to the lore that's there, but add a scientific name to it.
I think that like I imagine like the game telephone, right?
Hmm.
With the first person, the message is clear and concise, but by the time that that message goes down to like the 10th person, it is so warped and discombobulated and it's so far from the truth. And I think that's how legends are kind of created. There was some truth around it. And over time, especially if it's been like hundreds or thousands of years, it becomes almost this fanciful myth. And so, like, I feel like that takes a big part in it. Um, as far as like, these civilizations having similar imagery
Depictions.
and depictions of these creatures, I think that the humans everywhere respond to their environments similar, like their fears, their survival challenges, psychology, and symbolic needs. Like when I think of like dragons, I think like they were discovering dinosaur fossils and kind of created their own stories around it. Um, I mean, and then the need for like spirits or the gods, ocean-based cultures. I think it's just like kind of natural to lean into that if you live by the ocean to kind of create these stories or have these stories like who knows, maybe it would explain disappearances or personify the sea, or maybe, even as children, you come up with these imaginations. And I know that, like, since becoming a parent, I can definitely say, like, wow, I have come up with a lot of stories now to create warnings for my children.
Give us an example, because I'm nosy. I'm gonna put you
What
on the
did
spot.
what did I say? What was it? It was something about like not brushing your teeth or eating candy. I was like, this fairy will come and like take your toys if you don't.
You see how Paulina giving the fairies them a bad name. Mind you, the tooth fairy actually comes and delivers money. You see, I will
No,
say,
I take it back. I take it back. The fairies, I always give them. I'm like, oh, maybe the fairies took them, and we do leave them offerings and build them houses. But yeah, that's
uh,
just an example of something, though. Like I say, like, oh well, this creature will come. I don't want to scare them, but
yeah,
so I make it nicer.
you need a little cautionary tale. I get that. And I hear your point. And I also just think that the absolutism that I was complaining about a couple episodes ago leaves no room for possibility. And I think that there is possibility here. When you look at these ancient cave drawings and you look at 8,000 years ago, they depicted such a similar creature to what like European mermaids are said to look like in terms of the silhouette, and is also so similar to what we see in the Caribbean region and indigenous cultures and the way that they represent their water spirits, and even in Africa and all of the different countries and communities in Africa, especially that live by the water, by the rivers. Um, it's just, it is, I just feel like it would be so unusual that all of these cultures would come up with such similar depictions despite being across the world. And I do think that there has to be some sort of truth there. There has to be. It didn't just come out of thin air.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm in between because I also feel like it's human nature to want to give human shapes to
Yeah.
things. Kind of like being in the dark and you see a shadow and you're like, "Oh my God, it looks like the a human body and the
That man.
arms." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then when I also look at ancient culture, I think of Egypt, they had a lot of half animal, half human thing, like,
Yeah.
depictions. And a half fish, half person could definitely be on the list as well. There were a lot. So it's hard, but I see what you're saying too, because there are a lot of civilizations that have like built
Yeah.
similar like
In fact, most
construction
of
and
them.
buildings, and it's impossible for them to be in contact with each other. So how do they know
Yeah.
this architectural like
How does that drop
techniques?
yeah, how does that drop into consciousness? And, like, most of these ancient civilizations have water spirits that have very similar features. And I guess you could also say, if I was to argue against that, that the whole notion of a fin, look at how many animals have a fin in the ocean. Would it be that far of a cry if you were to create an ocean entity, for your ocean entity to have a fin?
Yeah.
And so I could say that it could go either way. I lean more toward mermaids are real.
And I am not sure. I think I used to lean towards it, but like I think I'm becoming so also turned off by what you said, like TikTokers and people just posting so much fake
Yeah.
shit. I lean more towards if it was possible, it would probably look like a dolphin, to be
Okay.
honest.
Okay. I will accept that. And I will also say, for anybody in the audience listening, please send in your mermaid stories. And if that young lady who sent me in that story all those years ago is listening and wants to share her story now, we would love to have it.
Yeah.
I think what would be helpful for Paulina to get Paulina on our side is that she needs more stories.
I do. Tell me. Well, you guys, I think that concludes everything for this episode. And
Yes.
any final thoughts?
No, other than, guys, I'm super sick. So if you see me here muting my mic and like coughing in the background, it's because I'm trying to get my life together.
Poor Gabby.
I know.
Wish her health.
I know. We're going to be back next week, of course, for another episode. Please send us your fan mail. Let us know if you like episodes that don't always have a discussion, because we don't mind changing up the pace for you.
Mhm.
And actually, I think I have an idea of what next week's episode is going to be, and I think it's going to be 2 mini episodes that Paulina and I
Mm.
haven't released yet that I think you guys are going to really enjoy because they're interesting bits of lore.
Okay. Well, we'll see you next Thursday.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Caribbean Mystics Podcast.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to share with your family and friends. Like, follow, and subscribe to keep up with all of our spooky Caribbean content.
Do you have a story you'd like to share that took place in the Caribbean? Email us at caribbeanmysticspodcast@gmail.com. That's caribbeanmysticspodcast@gmail.com. Or check the show notes for more info.
Caribbean Mystics is created and hosted by Paulina Creaky and Gabrielle Carrard. Theme song is Folktale Juve Rhythm by Umi Marcano.